Sat Shri Akal, Ram Ram, Namaste, Islam. I'm your host Yasin Andava and you're watching J2 channel. Today we have our very own guest, Mr. Navtej Mangarji, and we will be discussing tribal and ethnic problems of Jats in Sapta Sindhu. Thank you very much, Mangarji, for joining our program and giving your precious time. So first of all, please let us
Thank
surprise
you,
that where
Sanjeev.
did you
Yeah, it's my
born?
pleasure. It's my pleasure. Yeah.
So first of all, please let us surprise that where did you born, and from where did you get your early education and higher education, and where did you work as a professional, and a precise introduction of your family as well.
Sure. So basically, in terms of my family, uh, on my father's side, we're traced back to Patiala in Punjab, Kubai. And my mother's side is from near Ludhiana. Obviously, both Jaat landowning families. My dada was a freedom fighter as well. So he was involved in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in Amritsar on Baisakhi 1919. Actually, at the time, he was studying at Presidency College, Kolkata. At the time that he participated in uh, the meeting that took place on that fateful day, after which, and two of his best friends were killed in that Jallianwala Bagh. So he carried out boycott of Punjab universities with the support of his father, I have to say. And he was only 18 at the time. And then from there, he proceeded to University of British Columbia, so in Canada. So he was the very first Asian and very first Sikh to study at that university. Um, and he did his economics degree there, magna cum laude, and he was a gold medalist in oratory. From there, he proceeded to Ireland, to Queen's College, Belfast, and then to UCL, University College London, to do law, and then Lincoln's Inn. And then, being a barrister at Lincoln's Inn, he then moved to India and he registered with the Lahore Bar. So actually, by 26, he'd done 4 degrees and was a barrister. So he was very accomplished academically, intellectually. He then went off to East Africa because actually my dada's father, whose name was Harnam Singh, he had bought land in East Africa in the early 1900s, about several thousand acres. So I think my dada went there on a whim and discovered, oh, it's a nice place to live, nice place to settle down. He set up legal practice. So he became an elected member of the Legislative Assembly, specially elected. He then became the top criminal lawyer in Kenya and East Africa. He was the very first non-European and non-white in the whole of East Africa to become appointed to Queen's Council. And he was president of the Law Society. He was president of the Sikh Union, and he was president of the Kenya Indian or East African Indian National Congress that worked, with the Indian government to support the freedom and independence of British colonies,
Mm-hmm.
in collusion with the Indian expat community.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit of history of my on that side. My father likewise was educated in India, and then he was educated in England. My father went to Oxford University. He studied PPE. He then did also LLB from London, and then he went on to Kenya, and he drafted the laws for the East African community, which was then to be 3 countries: Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And he was a commissioner. So he was in his early 30s. He was probably the most senior lawyer appointed within the governments of these countries, in terms of drafting laws. He then went on to. So I was born in that puts me in context. I was born in Arusha, Tanzania, and when I was 2 or 3, we moved to England, and my father joined the civil service, and he became the most senior Asian civil servant in England. So he went on to be the head of intellectual property at the Department of Trade and Industry,
Mm-hmm.
and as a consultant. So I myself am a lawyer. I have 2 brothers, one a dentist, one an accountant, chartered accountant. I did my degree in London University. I did law. I then went to the College of Law and qualified as a solicitor. Although actually student member of Lincoln's Inn, even to this day. I'm probably the longest serving student member of Lincoln's Inn, in spite of not having gone for the bar, but gone for solicitors.
Mm-hmm.
So when I qualified as a lawyer, I worked in-house in a lot of multinationals. So I worked in the automotive for Peugeot Citroën, one of the largest motor manufacturers. I've worked in pharmaceuticals, Pfizer, Wyeth, Allergan, who are the people, who produce Botox, who
Yeah.
patented
Yes.
Botox. So I was the head
Mm-hmm.
of, I was head of legal for distributor management for EMEA in Southeast Asia there. I worked for Cemex, which is like Heidelberg, one of the biggest cement companies. I worked for 3M as one of the top senior lawyers, commercial lawyers on M&A work. Uh, Axis, Royal Sun and Life. So I've worked a lot in-house in some of the top multinationals, global companies, and also as VP legal for a Bahrain-based company, PVAX, before I gave up everything. And that's exactly what happened in 2009 or 10. I basically retired and I came to India to pursue actually what was nothing to do with the Jatt community. It was to do with pursuing my passion for wildlife conservation. Because ever since I was young, I loved nature, I loved wildlife. I think probably because born in East Africa, it was somehow deeply ingrained in those genes. So I'd already done a lot of voluntary work for a lot of organizations like EIA, Environmental Investigation Agency, that investigates illegal trade in CITES endangered species. I was a member of London Zoological Society, Fauna Flora International, so all these type of organizations. I've been in magazines, Profitable Practice magazine in Canada. That was in 2014. No, sorry, 2000. Yeah, 14, I think it was, summer version. I've been on radio, Capital Red FM in Canada. I've given
Mm-hmm.
talks in Calgary at zoos. So I've been in newspapers, Times of India on tiger conservation. So, and it was really with that that I came to India to pursue that passion and get more involved with grassroots sort of conservation. But in the process, funnily enough, I got more exposed to my community. I came here. I came to Gwalior actually, and that's where I met my wife, my second wife. We settled down in Gwalior, and although I had, sorry, I hope I'm not going off the tangent here. Sorry, Asin. I mean,
No,
um,
no, it's all right. Mm-hmm.
so just coming to, so then I found. Well, I'll let you go on to the next question. Sorry, because that probably
So
addresses what I'm about to say.
no,
Yeah.
it's all right. So have you been in your native village, and what's the name of your native village? I mean,
Oh, sorry.
do
Yes.
you know the Mangat clan tribe, and where are most of the villages of the Mangat clan? And are there any other Jat clans nearby of that belt?
Yes, very interesting. So basically, most of the Mangkat clans in Punjab, Indian Punjab, they're concentrated in Batinda, like Rampura. So, for example, a very good friend of mine, his name is Sardar Dipinder Singh Vark. He is the direct descendant of Nawab Kapoor Singh, who founded the Dal Khalsa and the Sikh missiles, who basically established the foundations of the Sikh empire that later Ranjit Singh established. So his wife is Mangat. She's from Rampura, which is near Batinda. And the other large concentration of the Mangat clan is around Ludhiana and Samrala. And Ludhiana bordering Patiala. So my dad was Kube. In fact, if you look at Kube, there's a very large stadium there called Variam Singh Stadium, where they have, the national Kabaddi championships,
Yes.
sometimes even international between Pakistan. So that was built in honor of my dada's chacha, Variam Singh. So so that was where we were based. Now, if you talk of other Mangat clans, really it spread right from there all the way to Sialkot. And I was
Mm-hmm.
speaking with Mudasa the other day, one of our joint mutual colleagues and acquaintances, Mudasa Bajwaji. And I was saying, yes, well, according to Asan Bajwa, who's done a lot of great work on the tribes and the clans, about Jat clans, fantastic work. I mean, I think his scholarship is remarkable. There's no one who compares to him on YouTube. He said Mangats actually can be traced to Sialkot. And then they moved down. So if you look at Mangat villages and clans, you see that progression from Sialkot through to Gujarat, meaning Gujarat, which is near to Lahore. Not to be confused with Gujarat in India, but there's a city called Gujarat near Lahore. And from there to a place I'm not sure that featured very prominently in Sikh history. Mangat, there's a main Gurdwara there, and that was associated with the very beginnings of Sikhism. So when you look at the distribution in Punjab, you can almost see how we can trace the migration from that extreme northern, what is now Pakistan, what was then, the area bordering Afghanistan, right through to what we call Malwai, which is East Punjab. And then also, interestingly, down south to Rajasthan, because a lot of people have told me that there is Mangats can actually originate, or a lot of the clans, Mangat clans, they moved down into Rajasthan, maybe from Sialkot side, they moved into Rajasthan, then they moved back again into Malwai. We don't really know. But what's interesting is if you look at a place called Todgarh, Todgarh, that was named actually after Colonel Todd, who was a great British adventurer in the 18th century, and he ruled that area and he established a little minor kingdom. But hundreds of years before that, centuries ago, this area was part of Ajmer, and that is the area that is close to Jaipur. So it's all that part of Rajasthan, like from Jaipur, Ajmer, a huge swath of the Aravalis. And that was ruled by a Mangat Maharaj. He's called Mangat Maharaj Deji of the Parva dynasty. Parva is also Jat, P-A-W-R. And in the 14th century or 15th century. So there is a temple there to this day where pilgrims come from not just Rajasthan nearby, but from all over India to the temple to do darshan and everything else, and invoking his name, Mangat Maharaj Deji. And he was a prince, and you can see from the depiction and everything else. But what's very interestingly, like all our names, like similarly with Randava, Bajwa, with Man, with Dylan, with Gill, with Gadaval, with Sandhu, Sidhu, with Bering, with Billing, with Baines, all these names, all these clans, these, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, are some of the most ancient Jat, Aryan Jat clans. So you can find a lot of their origin in Russia, in the Dniester River regions, in the Volga. So Virk, V-I-R-K, trace their origins to actually the Volga River. And in very ancient sources, they mention them as coming from that particular area. I mean, it was a huge area, Pontic Caspian Steppe, it's called. So that's from the Aral Caspian Seas all the way to the Black Sea. And why I mention this is because if you look at Mangat, very interestingly, not many people know this. You might have heard of this Russian priest called Rasputin, who was very close to the Tsar, the Russian imperial family in the 19th century. And eventually one of the members of the Russian royal family, realizing that Rasputin was dangerous, assassinated him. And it's very famous. If you look at the movies made about it, songs. And the person who assassinated was Prince Yusupov. What's very interesting is Prince Yusupov's patriarchal or patrilineal descent was to Mangats, because there were Mangats who came with what's called the Nurgoy horde. So the Nurgoy horde were the people who accompanied the Mongols when they moved into that part of Russia, like in the 10th, 11th century. But this is the point. Doesn't mean that the Mongols were all Mongoloid. There were different races, clans, tribes. So we have, even up until 1922, the Emir of Bukhara, who ruled basically what's called the central, the Golden Horde, or one of the most prime areas of Central Asia, which is Tashkent, Bukhara. He was Mangit. The dynasty was called Mangit dynasty. So I'm sorry. I hope that's a slight sort of like synopsis of what my understanding of what Mangit and the clans are.
It's a very hard discussion. It's a very hard to conclude something. Where did we ever originate? So, but
Yes.
basically, what the theories and what the, new researchers are showing right now, that our origin was India. So it's a very long discussion. We can't conclude, in a one line or in some lines. So, did you meet any famous personalities of Mangat clans?
I haven't, not particular. No, I haven't myself. I mean, I know that there are personalities that are quite prominent, although I haven't met them. There was a Commodore Mangat, DS, I think he was DS Mangat, who was very famous in one of our wars, post independence. He was one of he was awarded one of the highest awards for gallantry. One of the top airline. There was there's also this um, uh, abroad, Devinder Singh Mangat, who I believe is one of the top plastic surgeons in the United States. And there's also a guy called Rick Mangat who invented and patented the spy imaging system, which is a kind of system that's used with all invasive surgery. So not invasive surgery, like laser cum keyhole surgery. It's like the latest
Mhm.
technology. So basically, every surgeon today in the world, when they're going for the most modern laser type of keyhole, they use this specific product, this specific technology. And his
Mhm.
name is Rick Mangat. And but in terms of Mangat's famous other Mangats, no, I have to be honest, I haven't come across um, while I've been living in India specifically.
Mhm. So, as you said right now, that you just came to preserve the wildlife. So, when did you
Yeah.
start think rationally, and when did you start, you are a true Jat, and what, or and what did you when did you realize that Jats are the true ethnic identity of subcontinent or Sapta Sindhu, and what kind of work are you doing right now for Jat tribe?
Yeah, thank you. So when I first came here, when I was in England, I was always proud of being a Jat. I mean, my dad, my family were proud of Jats, not in a way that was fanatical. I mean, we were proud, but it wasn't in a way that we were arrogant or conceited about it. But as you know, it's always proud to be your heritage. But of course, in England, you don't have the resources, you don't have the exposure that you do to the Jat history, obviously, and the archaeology and the physical evidence that you have in India. So when I came to India, I found all these place names that have Jat origins, obviously in Delhi and further afield. And then looking at, for example, old forts, Uchagaon, everywhere. I mean, in Pakistan, so many Vark forts, 12 forts at least. So finding this out, but I think one thing that made me more committed then to working for my community is when I found what I didn't discover in England, that here among our own Indian community, whereas in the West, there's so much respect for the Jats, there's so much admiration for the Jats, there's so much more knowledge of us Jats. Here, the knowledge was there, but it was subdued. Subdued because of jealousy, of antipathy, because, see, we are a distinct race. We are an Aryan race. We are what I call a pure white Caucasian, dolichocephalic, armonoid race. Forget the fact that our complexions have changed. White people, when they live in a hot climate, their complexions change. You can see that in South Africa, you can see it in Florida. That's irrelevant. But and then I found that, for example, references in certain works by certain historians calling us Sudra, calling us peasants, agriculturists, laborers, which I hadn't been exposed to such extent when I was in England from the books I read and everything else. And this was largely by historians in India, whom I can only call highly propagandist, uneducated, highly ignorant, obviously working for a political agenda, whether that be Congress or BJP. And when you see the backdrop of Indian history, it makes sense. We were large landowners, we were affluent, we held onto the largest land banks in India. So who wouldn't want to seize that and destroy our integrity, our credibility, our identity? So, for example, a perfect example is Kushwant Singh, who is a Khatri Sikh. In his works, he makes numerous references to Jats as not just peasants, by the way, as Sudras. Some of his works might have been edited, but I've read all his works, and I thought this is absolutely nonsense because we all know that the
Mhm.
Sudra and the definition of a Sudra in India, besides being the lowest caste above the tribals, was a laborer, was a menial, somebody who was like an indentured, almost like a slave or a serf, which we never were. We all know we Jats were always landowners, we were rulers, we were fighters, we were warriors. So that whole premise had to be dismissed. It was nonsense. Then the second stage I found was that many of the people, non-Jat people, I'm talking of Khatris, Brahmins, Rajputs, people from all other different communities, started rewriting history and omitting us from the records, in spite of the fact that the records showing who we are, what we are, what we achieved, is indisputable, incontrovertible. So, for example, another very good example, claiming that Anangpal Tomar was a Rajput, claiming that Man Singh Tomar of Gwalior, who actually built the Gwalior fort as we know it, and his son, Vikramaditya, were Rajput. Now it's been proven because we have shown the Gotras, we have shown whom Anangpal married, we have shown whom Vikramaditya married, we have shown the families that Man Singh Tomar married. They were Jat through and through. And in fact, what the Rajputs are claiming is you Jats are the outcasts of us Rajputs, whereas in reality, we all know, and incidentally, we all know from research, not just conducted in India, conducted internationally and by the British, and I've read all the works, Ibbotson, Rhodes, Pocock, Doyle, Davies, Cunningham, Gordon, Lieutenant General Hood Gordon, and they're all unanimous in stating that the Jats were the purest Aryan race. We were the rulers, the warriors, the landowners. We were the Zayildars, the Kunvas. We had those titles. And in fact, the Rajputs were the outcasts of Jat community. When a Jat married outside his race, he became outcast. And the analogy I give, and it's a very simple analogy, it's rather like when the English came to India. If an Englishman married an Indian, the children of offspring, and we've all heard this expression, were like Chichi. They were called Chichi. They were outcasts. South Africa, the same with the Boers and the Germans and the French. Even the United States, what is now the United States, when the whites intermarried. So it was no different with us because we were a distinct, unique race. We're not of the race that belongs to all the other castes in India. So how could we be outcast? How could a Rajput become a Jat? A Rajput is not even our race. It's not even an Aryan race. And Rajput is actually a very pejorative title. It means Rajput. It's actually the bastardized son of a Jat with a non-Jat, as opposed to say Rajkumar. And Ajay Singh Gatwala, who's done great work in America on us, researching us Jats, and who's provided great inspiration to me, and I think all of us Jats that who know him and on our groups, has explained this and has provided the evidence that, for example, Tomar Rajputs are the outcasts from Jats who married outside their caste, and their progeny were not given Jat status. And I'll take another example. If you take in Punjab, one of the Maharajas in the 18th century, post Ranjit Singh, was Kapurthala. You might have heard Maharaja Kapurthala. Yes. So Maharaja of Kapurthala's ancestor was a Jat from Alu, the village of Alu in Punjab. But his nephew, who took over the missile, intermarried with a Kalal of the brewing caste, Dasu caste. And he was madly in love with this girl. He wanted to marry her. And his parents wouldn't agree. But the girl's parents agreed, but on one condition, that his progeny would thereafter be of that caste, not Jat caste, Kalal caste, which they've maintained to this day. Even though we might think of them as Jats, they're not, and they don't regard themselves as such. So that's just a very good example from the context of Jat Sikh history, right? So that's how I became aware of what I would regard as pernicious and brainwashing propaganda perpetrated only in India in modern times against the Jat community. And that's how I got involved, to dispel all this rubbish, myths, lies, and deceit.
Mangaji, do you think that
Mm.
other non-native peoples are destroying our native belts and trying to grab our own land? How can we overcome such problems in order to protect our land, our people, and our ethnic belts?
Very good question. Yes, the answer to your question is yes, they have done it, they are doing it. And I'll give you a perfect example. We had a number of events in Northwest India, obviously partition, but we also had the Land Ceiling Act in 1972, where in the Punjab, farmers could only hold 15 acres or something per head. So the rest of the land had to be given out to others. In addition to that, we had the division of our Indian Punjab into three regions, which was Haryana, Himachal, and Punjab, on so called linguistic lines, which was nonsense because the language that was spoken had always been spoken, even in Haryana, was not Hindi. It was Braj or Jatki or dialect of Jatki. So the whole basis for doing that was false and misleading and basically devious. So what happened then? A lot of people started migrating into Haryana, into Punjab. A lot of people from UP, from Bihar, they started owning land because a lot of land had to be obviously offloaded by us Jats. Other people came to farm it, own it in time, and they started taking Jat names. A lot of the chamars or lower castes, so we call them Sudras, who worked on our lands, they took Jat names because they realized to function and survive in that society, they needed to associate with those type of brand names. And it's very interesting. When you look at our Punjab in India, we have the highest concentration of scheduled castes of any state in the whole of India. 30% of population in Punjab is made up of SCs. And that is why in the recent elections, AAP won Punjab because they were appealing to the prejudices and the of the SCs and these communities who have taken our names, who are farming our land, who are putting themselves out as Jatt when they're not. So just that in itself, when you're allowing people to come into our region who don't have our culture, who don't have exposure to our language, it's a form of a very clever form of eradicating our culture. So how do we mobilize against that? How do we protect ourselves against that? It's very difficult because when, for example, Qatar, who is a Qatri, became the chief minister, BJP chief minister of Haryana, he created a law or a bylaw or some bill or whatever, something that was passed, which is unconstitutional, it's inhumane, it goes against democracy, it goes against human rights, whereby panchayats of sarpanchas of all the panchayats now in Haryana have to have certain educational qualifications to be panchayats, to be sarpanchas. Now, you, I, and all of us Jats know that we are farmers. We are mostly farmers. Most of us haven't gone to those levels of education because we don't need to. We farm, we're affluent, but this has had the effect of removing us and replacing us as sarpanch with who? Khatris, baniyas, pandits. So nothing could prove to be a better way of dispossessing Jats in Haryana. Now, same thing has been done in Punjab under Chadda, Raghu, Chadda, and Kejriwal. What they've done is now all the lands in Punjab, the panchayat, and each panchayat owns like 3,000 or something acres. Like they're huge. These villages are huge. So what they've done, they have parceled out these lands by giving, I think it's puttas. So of maybe 50, 60 acres to so taking them on lease from our Jatt farmers and say, look, we'll lease this from you, 50, 60 acres for maybe 10 lakhs a year. But these same people who are leasing on 99-year leases, this is what I have to emphasize, 99-year leases, which they can extend, they can prolong, They are then giving out the same land on sublease, not for like 10 lakhs, but 1 crore a year. I mean, I'm just giving you a very vague example. So the people who are leasing the land from us Jats are effectively dispossessing us because these leases are long leases. They're tied in for 99 years. By 99 years, our Jats will be gone. And these people would have made a fortune from our land by taking the rent that is 100,000 times more than what they're paying us. So they force us more into poverty. And if you combine that with what happened after partition, when the non-Jat Hindus and Sikhs, Khatris especially, came from Pakistan side into India, land was distributed to them in Delhi. Land that was owned by Jats was distributed by the Nehru government to these people, like in Hozkaz, like in Malviya Nagar, like in Kar Market, like in Tuklakabad. These were all Jat lands and scenic farms, for example. To this day, that is illegal possession. But these people, Khatris who came from Pakistan and migrated, they have homes there that are worth 40, 50 crores on land that they have no right to. Because what Nehru had done, he had distributed these lands and said, no, don't worry, you Jats, we'll give you compensation. To this day, no compensation has been given to those same Jat funds. Similarly, Lachan's Delhi, where we have, the parliament in Delhi, that land was owned by Jats. The British did the same thing. They said, oh, we'll take the land from you and we'll give you compensation. Nothing. So us Jats are fighting for compensation to this day. Even if you take recently a very good acquaintance of mine, Puneet Singhal Devli, he comes from Devli village. The village is named after his ancestors, 3,000 acres, very close to Hozkaz, 7 kilometers. The land there is worth 3 lakhs. So that's 300,000 rupees, which is approximately, I think, $4,000 US dollars per square yard, or other words, per 9 square feet. And this land was, again, same thing. Decades ago, it was taken by the government on the basis of either the government needed it for utilities, facilities, amenities, for infrastructure, under the rules of compulsory acquisition with compensation to be given. No compensation has been given. But worse, these fraudulent, deceptive, scheming, lying politicians have given those lands to private companies like Supertech, run by RK Aurora and others, who've built apartments on it, to liquor barons who built liquor shops under AAP recently. So what I'm trying to tell you is this is a pogrom. Please, every Jat who's listening to this audio, please realize, whether you live in Pakistan, England, Canada, USA, there is a systematic pogrom being committed against Jats in the Indian subcontinent. I can't speak for Pakistan, but I can say in India. Now, a pogrom doesn't imply physical extermination. It works in many other surreptitious ways. It's the eradication of your culture, your language, like the English did with the Welsh. When the English peoples conquered that region of Wales in western the British United Kingdom, they forbade the Welsh from speaking their language. They had to adopt the same culture. So it basically became almost extinct. So that is a form of genocide. And that is what's happening to us Jats. So coming back again to what you're saying, how do we rally? We have become more conscious. We have become more aware. Like, for example, there is a global Jatt summit, which Satyapal Malikji, who is the current governor in India of Meghalaya state, brilliant man. He's a Rajya Sabha member, upper house. He has been the governor of 4 other states prior to Meghalaya. One is Goa, Jammu, Orissa, Bihar. He's a big landowner. He addressed Modi at the recent farmers' riots and said, look, you better repeal these farm laws. And because your laws, farm laws, are specifically targeted at Jats, because the largest land available today is only in Punjab, the richest land. And when you're having these type of laws, farm laws, that are forcing our farmers not to go to the mandi, but to go to certain other distributors, who are, by the way, who? Adani and Ambani, who all they do is take our grain, still the same thing, buy it at 100 rupees a quintal and sell it at 1,000 rupees, and then hoard it and store it in silos, and then hedge with inflation against the price. So, effectively, it's the same situation as before. How are we benefiting? So, Satyapal Malik told Modi, look, you better change these laws, because be careful. If you rub the Jats the wrong way, you remember what happened to Indira Gandhi. You remember what happened to General Vadya, the general who was and also others like Byan Singh, and of course Sir Michael O'Dwyer, the man who ordered the Jallianwala Bagh. It was funny. Literally a week later, Modi repealed those three laws. So it shows you that we can have that effect. And so Satyapal Malik, see, people like him need, what I'm trying to say, he needs to take the initiative. He's powerful. He has the background, the qualifications. We also have the International Jatt Parliament, which is great. I mean, Tikait has been there, Malik has been there. A lot of other leaders have participated in that. We're widespread now on, like you yourself informed me, Asanji, on Facebook, on YouTube. There are many, many sites. On Quora, there are a vast number of brilliant papers that have been written on Quora. By the way, not just by Jats, by non-Jats, supporting us. So the thing is, we have to educate our Jat people. You are a Jat. This is your history. Nobody can take it away from you. This is your means of livelihood. And that, if that goes, which it shouldn't go, because you've acquired it through blood, sweat, and tears, you lose your culture, you lose your identity, and you become extinct. Because then what happens? You start going into the mainstream of society, mixing, not that it's wrong with the mixing, but losing the values that associate with Jathood, which is what? Being people of the soil, being farmers, being of that sturdy stock, that resilient stock. So, I mean, that is one way. And another, I think, that Mudasa said, Mudasa Bajwaji said, when I spoke to him the other day, was, which is a great idea, is to start these virtual villages. In other words, it doesn't matter what country we are in. We have these virtual villages so we can trace our clans. We have the DNA testing, which shows, right, from this village, we can show that Bajwas are 190% steppe migratory people. So that unifies us. It shows us that, yes, you are Jats, you are a distinct race. You can preserve this culture. And you must preserve this culture. The Kurds have done the same. The Kurds, who are an Aryan people, incidentally, like us, the Kurds are spread over many countries in the Middle and Near East, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, maybe Iran, but they formed a cohesion. They formed a society, although they're in different countries, that is like a representative body that addresses their concerns, that provides support and solidarity, which is what we need to do. And if people say, oh, but hang on, we need a country, we need a unified geographic base to do that. No, we don't. And the example I gave you, well before independence, well before Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru, there was a person called Raja Mahendra Pratap Singh, Maharaja Mahendra Pratap Singh. He was a Jaat royal from what is today Haryana. I think it's Hisar state. Sorry, my memory is going at the moment, but yes, very prominent, Mahendra Pratap Singh. He formed the provisional government of India that was recognized by the international community abroad. And where? In Kabul, Afghanistan. And the recognition was to such degree that in 1932, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which even Mahatma Gandhi may have been, but with not such wide international support. So we don't have to be based in India. We don't have to have our own state or autonomy, although, yes, I would prefer that. And that comes to the next point. Do we find those areas of predominantly Jat population, like they have done in India with tribal states, Jharkhand, Uttarankshi, Uttarakhand, Telangana? Why not the same with us? But we can only achieve that if we prove that we are a distinct ethnic community with a distinct culture. Then there's nothing, even under the Indian laws, constitutionally otherwise, that now prevents us from forming our own state. Jattistan, whatever we want to call it, in those areas of predominantly Jat population, or where I should say, where we Jats are unique and endemic.
Mm-hmm.
So that is another solution. How we go about achieving that and finding those pockets is probably very difficult, because now with the encroachment, with the way that they're dealing with our community, it makes it very difficult to realize that goal and objective.
Mangarji, what would you prefer to call yourself? Should I call you Punjabi? Should I call you Sikh? Or should I call you true Aryan Jat? And
No, Aryan Jaat.
there's another question. And do you not think that
Sure.
linguistic and religious identities are fake and barriers which are being used by non-Jats to make artificial link with the land, with land and son of soils?
Very good question. Yes, I agree with you. Firstly, I'm a Jat. I'm an Aryan Jat. We were Jats for millennia, for thousands of years before any of the mainstream religions came into place. And the second point is, because your culture and your race and your community and the sacrifices that you've gone through for thousands of years, which has shaped your DNA, is something that no religion can do in the short span of time, relatively, that these religions have been in existence. The second point is, yes, if you look at religion, take for example, in India, BJP is on this course of Hindutva, which is run by Brahmins according to what they perceive as what India is and what our society is. And obviously, it means the language, which they say is Sanskrit based, whether it's Hindi. That's not our language. That's not our culture. It's not even our religion. Hinduism, as practiced today and is propounded and expounded by RSS, Shiv Sena, BJP, is not our religion. We Jats were completely monotheistic. When I say monotheistic, I mean that we worshipped the elements as part of the one divine. So our gods, if you read the Rig Veda, were obviously Surya, Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Vatsya. These were our gods, but not individually as part of the representation of the cosmos, which you see later on embodied in the Upanishads. Where did the Upanishads draw the inspiration from? It was from the Rig Veda, which mentions the Jata Vedas, which mentions the rituals. So what has happened with Hinduism, it's Hinduized us Jats. Now one might say, well, Hindu and Jat, there's a certain synonymy. No, there is not a synonym. Hinduism is not, it's a Dravidian language. It's a Dravidian culture. And when I say language, people don't realize that Sanskrit itself had used a Semitic script called Prakrit or Brahmi. So Brahmi script at the time of Emperor Ashok of the Mauryan dynasty was completely Semitic. Similarly, on that same note, the gods that are worshipped, whether it be Krishna, Vishnu, Shiv, Durga, Kali, these are not Aryan gods. These were gods that were taken from the Indian subcontinent, that were superimposed on our gods, and to make us, to integrate us and absorb us into that culture. So similarly, if you look at what's happened in Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, maybe the same thing is what I call the Arabicization of our culture, the language, the customs, which have the effect of eradicating what was the indigenous culture. So yes, the religions have done phenomenal harm. And on this point, no less in India than in, say, Pakistan or Afghanistan or Iran. No less. Because just as you have in Pakistan, the Sayyids, who are claiming all the credit for great wars, conquests, great contributions to culture in that region, and adopting and stealing our Jatt history and culture. The same is happening here with the
Mm-hmm.
Brahmins and the Rajputs.
Mm-hmm.
They are appropriating our history and claiming it as their own.
So, Mangaji, there is a very famous saying, and politicians keep on saying in front of public, the land of Punjab or the land of Sapta Sindhu is the land of Peer, Gurus, and prophets. Do you believe on it, or do you believe that it is a land of Aryans or it's the land of Aryabharta? What's your opinion?
My view, it's a land of Aryavata, and I'll tell you why. Um, there has been a theory, again, put forward by politically conniving individuals in India from outside of our community that, oh, this region was the Harappan civilization. It was a Dravidian civilization. It had existed for thousands of years because we've examined the DNA and the DNA has shown that these people were non-Aryan. What nonsense! Absolute nonsense. People migrated to this region over thousands of years of different races. On that same note, if you look at Rakhi Gadi in Haryana, one of the largest Harappan sites, which is contemporaneous with Mohenjo-daro in Sindh and Harappa in Punjab, in what's today Pakistan, and Kuttij. They have found skeletal remains with DNA that matches the same residents of that region, for example, Rakhi Kari today, i.e. the Jats. So yes, Jats have been there for thousands of years. Because if you go back to our earliest history, the Gutians, Gutins, they were around at the time of the Sumerians. They fought the Sumerians. We're talking of 3,500 BC. So with those conquests, they would have moved across a very wide expanse. And if you look geographically, this area of Sindh is connected to where? It's connected to Iran, Persia. All that region was ruled by the Sumerians. So if the Gutians had fought and battled against the Sumerians and spread and their conquests, it's very conceivable that from the earliest times, Jaat would have settled in Sindh. So this idea that, oh, no, actually it is Dravidian, it's always been Dravidian, it's always remained Dravidian, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa is Dravidian, is completely unfounded. So yes, it's as much a part of Aryavata and of our Jaat ancestry as any other part of Northwest India.
Mangaji, you have written very informative paper about Jat versus Khatris. So, from where
Yeah.
did you get this idea to compare these two races?
Right, I'll tell you why. Because the Qataris fraudulently have claimed that, fraudulently, falsely, however you wish to interpret it, that they are Kshatri, and that they are the true Aryans of India, Northwest India. And we know, I've really written extensively about this, and I probably won't repeat all the arguments here for time's sake. The Khatri is actually been proven to be the kattas or the bookkeepers or shopkeepers, and in some cases even the menial class, kin to Sudras of that region, going back thousands of years, and to have through all DNA testing, and as my friend again Ajay Gatwala has said, Ajayji, that blood doesn't lie, science doesn't lie, and DNA doesn't lie. So when you look at the DNA, the Qataris are shown to have more in common by way of their mitochondrial DNA, haploglyph T DNA, R1A1 DNA with Dravidian peoples. Not just Dravidians, incidentally, but pre-Dravidians. That means Australoid, Negroid peoples of India, Aboriginal peoples, Adivasis. They were very mixed. And Barstow and all these top English historians have proved it. So this thing about the Khatri being Kshatri was actually invented, formulated fraudulently when they came from Pakistan and they migrated. Because you've got to remember, they had no identity. They were shopkeepers, laborers, menial classes there. They had to reinvent their identity, reinvent their status. So they started conceiving of formulating these false ideologies about their origins, that they are the Jats, that they are Aryans, they were the Kshatris. But all research, and I mean physical, Archaeological, scientific, DNA has disproved that. There's never been any record of any Khatri as a Kshatri in any records, any correlation of Khatri to Kshatri. In fact, quite the opposite. There's been no Khatri dynasty. If you look at their names, Kapoor, Chawla, Chadda, Taneja, none of them. Not inherent or innate in any writings, archaeology, nothing, or books, or tales, or folklore, nothing. So why I developed this specific targeting of Qataris is because they have gone out of their way to be more averse to us Jats than any other community to some degree. Because let's face it, look at it logically, they are competing with Jats in the Jat heartland. Most Qataris come from West Punjab. So in a sense, they had more to gain and more to lose by not taking up a stance, or should I say, by taking up a stance against Jats, or by not taking up a stance against Jats. So that's why I developed this specific paper, if you like, to show, look, Khatris are not Kshatris, they're not Aryan, they never were rulers, warriors, or landowners. They were of a class, they're firstly a Dravidian caste, and within that Dravidian caste of the lowest socioeconomic order. Not just Vaishyas, but even Sudras, because even Banyas and Marwadis regarded them as inferior. So that is why I took this stance, because they are going out of their way, even as much, if not more, than Rajputs and Brahmins to put themselves up as something that they're not. And the other reason is that they have Kushwan Singh, as I mentioned earlier, is one Khatri who has, in my view, is one of the worst historians in India, because he was like I would call a Nehru appointed historian. He wrote history. Yes, he wrote history of the Sikhs, but he wrote it very much from the point of view of destroying the Jatt identity in his writings, showing, yes, we had Ranjit Singh and the Sikh Empire, but we were peasants, we were Sudras, and we suddenly came up in the 17th century and there's no history of us before. So that type of writing that has been supported by, vindicated by so many other Khatris has done more damage probably to our community.
Mangaji, do you not think that Jats, who always have been a martial race and lords of Sapta Sindhu or subcontinent, have now become followers of the other non-Jat people and they don't think rationally?
Yes, I think what has happened is, again, it's because of materialism. And I think, if I can quote Madasa again, Bajwa, the other day when I spoke to him, he made a very good point that Jat was all about, if you look at the Rig Veda and our practices, it was equality, it was democracy, it was solidarity. I actually believe that the seeds, the origin of the Panchayat came with the Jats. It originated with the Jats. Because we were agriculturists, we were sedentary, we were warriors too, but we weren't, for example, nomadic like the gypsies. So we had distinct traditions that were very much for maintaining decency, honor, equality, solidarity. So when we move away from that and we move into other societies and we get lured by materialism, wealth, ostentation, we will follow those people. We'll be influenced by Banyas, we'll be influenced by Khatris, and we'll intermarry with them, because and eventually we begin to see that this is the way of life. Forget our way of life. We want to have Mercedes and BMWs and jets and 5 mansions. So to that extent, some of them, but I would still emphasize some, not all, some have been influenced in such a way, but not all of them. There's still many of us. If you take India, and I'm sure, Asanji, you know this better than I do, in Pakistan, there are still huge landowners who are Jats, zamindars, powerful
Yes, that is
people,
true. That is true.
extremely wealthy people, but we're understated. And one example is, in 2008, the 5th richest man in the world was Kushal Pal Singh of DLF, the biggest property developer in the world. He was a Jat, Hindu Jat. Uh, if you look at India Bulls in India, if you look at Policy Bazaar, these are all companies that have been pioneered, created by Jats, who are billionaires. In fact, the youngest billionaire in India was the founder of Policy Bazaar, a Jat. The youngest um, and the first self-made Indian billionaire in the West was Dashran Singh Dalawal, a Jat. He's called the petrol king of America. So if you look at a lot of our Jats still in India, if you look at the top families in Punjab, whether it be Kerons or Mans, like Limras are the biggest transporters in India. They're worth billions. But this is the point. We're very humble. We're understated. We don't make a point of advertising our wealth in a materialistic, worldly, ostentatious way. And in that way, we probably don't form the network and the links that other people who are more superficial, more materialistic, more ostentatious, more fraudulent about portraying their wealth are, like the Qataris. Perfect example, like the Qataris.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very much an optimist. I think that we still have a lot of clout, a lot of power, a lot of wealth, but how we channel it, how we utilize it to benefit our community, to grow strong across all areas where Jats are found. So I mean India, I mean Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, maybe even Uzbekistan, other places and further afield.
Mangaji, what is your point of view about those non-Jats people who are using our clan's names? I mean, those are fakes and they are using our clan names intentionally. Do you not think that is it crime?
Yes, it is. And because it's being encouraged by politicians. I'll give you a perfect example. In India, a man called Manjinder Singh Sirsa, he is a Khatri. And as you know, all the Qataris control our gurdwaras. They use it as a money-making business because that's the Qatari mentality. They want to stay in control of the Sikhism, in control of the gurdwaras, win new converts to Sikhism. So at the moment, they're using the Mazhabis, the low-caste Sikhs against the Jats to build up that popularity, to gain more support, gain more power. And Manjinder Singh Sirsa is the one who's been supporting a lot of the Mazhabi low-caste Sikhs who are now turning around and saying two things. Ranjit Singh wasn't a Jat, which we know is rubbish. We know that's rubbish. It's been proven beyond reasonable doubt. But also taking our names. So taking our Jat names so that in the end, it's a form of genocide. Because what happens is when somebody takes our name, they steal identity, they steal our culture, they intermarry with genuine Jats, that gene base eventually disappears.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a crime. It's a crime because somebody, if I change my name tomorrow in England without deed poll, it's an offense. Now, if you say that in England, if I say, yeah, my name is Mangat, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm not an Indian. I'm actually from Iran or something else. It's not an offense. So, but so it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. It's a very clever thing to do. But where I think it is offensive is if somebody starts taking Jat names where they have no basis for doing so, it is a crime because it would be a crime in anywhere of the world. There's a law everywhere, every civilized country of the world. You just can't change your name and identity because it leads to so many other repercussions. So in ancient times, we Jats would deal with these people in a very severe manner because of honor, izzat. And izzat is what defines Jats, but it doesn't define any other community.
Mm-hmm. So, Mangaji, we have strength, but we are not, organized. Moreover,
Yeah.
scattered in different states, countries, and regions. So, what is the best? I would ask again. So, what's the best possible way or any way forward to make all Jats organize on one platform against mighty tycoons of corporate sector, just like Adani and Ambani? And because if they will not make themselves organize, they will be losing all their legacy, including culture, traditional land, and ethnic identities, all the things. So, what's the best possible way?
I think, and I've come back to this time again, the power of the pen is something that is very, very powerful. We have to agitate as well. So that means going through international bodies, human rights organizations. I stressed this before that what is happening in India is definitely a breach of human rights. It is a fundamental breach of human rights. It would be condemned by Amnesty International, which incidentally has been banned from India under Modi, along with other human rights organizations. Very convenient. So when you look at, we need to appeal to human rights organizations on an international basis and say, look, we are a community no different from the Kurds, no different from the Kalash, no different from a lot of other communities that you can identify throughout the world, who are distinct ethnic communities who are being persecuted, who are having their identity stolen from them, like we discussed, or encroached, and their livelihood is being destroyed. Because if our livelihood among Jats has always been, is, and is most likely to remain agriculture, if you take away agriculture from us, you are destroying the community with one fell swoop. So we have to go to a lot of international organizations, bodies, involve historians, involve writers, journalists in the West, and say, look, listen to us. This is our history, and that's where the writing comes into effect. We have to show our history. We have to show our origins, but we have to do it in a very precise, concise, succinct manner. There's no point giving a 500 volume book and saying, read about Jats. No, it has to be like a 5 to 10 page paper. This is who we are. And this is what the problems that we face. This is what we require. And that is how to proceed at that point, then involving the international media, involving the press, involving human rights organizations, and saying that what is going on in these countries is a deliberate attempt to exterminate an indigenous, an ethnic, and unique culture and race.
So, how can we organize ourselves rather going into
Yeah.
international media?
Yeah.
How can we organize ourselves?
I think we have to spread the literature. We have to make a portal. We have to make portals where anyone from the Jat community, like Mudassiji was saying about Facebook, it could be social media and say, look, if you're a Jat, come onto this portal, meet other Jats. What are your issues that you're discussing that you're having? How can we unite by way of a cohesive way to address these issues across the whole platform? Virtual villages is one thing. Identifying the clans is another thing. And yes, actually, a good example would be what the First Nations have done in Canada and United States. You have now what's called the Apache Nation, the Lakota Nation, the Comanche Nation. They're called the nation. If you look at America and Canada now, it's not a case of the derogatory Red Indians and on reserves. No, they formed their own independent, autonomous nations within the states. So we have to call ourselves the Jaat nation. We are a Jaat nation. Nation means what? It doesn't just mean a country with defined geographical common boundaries. No, it doesn't. Because why are the Comanches a nation? Or the Apaches? They're pockets of these nations in one specific political entity, which is the United States. So similarly, we have to have a Jaat nation in India or Pakistan of the clans. So among the Sioux, you have the Lakota Sioux. You have the Arapahoes. Among the Comanches, you have the Chihuahua, different types of Comanche clans. Same with us. There's no different. The nation and the clan is very different. Mangats, Bajwas, Randhawas, Mans, whatever. We are clans of tribes, clans of the same tribe, or if you like, of the race or the nation. So that concept of nationhood has to be devised, has to be formulated. And the only way we can do that with modern technology and information as it is today is through the internet, through portals like these. We have to have something that maps, which Mudassiji was saying, maps and shows our villages, where's Mangat, where's Bajwa, how many people here, what's the population. That's the kind of thing that we have to do.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Navtej Mangaji, for sharing your rational thoughts, and hopefully we will be meeting again and doing some other kind of discussion on different agenda. So, thank you once again for your
Thank you so much, Asan.
giving
It's been a
your very
pleasure
precious
speaking to
time.
you.
Thank you very
No,
much.
no, and thank you. It's been a pleasure linking up with you, and I thank you very much for arranging this wonderful interview and discussion, and very much I do too look forward to continuing this again in the future. Thank you,
Thank you
Asanji.
very much.